The stars were quiet the night the first human fleet appeared. To the Varelians, silence among the stars was sacred. For thousands of years, they had traveled across galaxies without ever hearing the sounds of war. But when the human ships arrived, silence turned into a whisper of fear. Commander Kareth of the Varelian Defense Council stood at the viewing platform, his long silver eyes reflecting the faint glow of the unknown vessels. "They came uninvited," he said softly, his voice calm but uneasy. The other officers nodded. None of them had seen ships that big or so heavily armored. At first, the humans did not attack. Their ships just hovered near the trade routes, scanning, observing, waiting. It almost felt polite, too polite. The Varelians sent messages, peaceful signals, but no clear reply came. Only silence. Then came the transmission, short, simple, and human. "We are preparing." Preparing for what? No one knew. For days, the Varelians watched strange lights on the human ships. They saw them gather in large halls, standing shoulder to shoulder in lines, wearing heavy armor that reflected the ship's lights like mirrors. The Varelians thought it was a weapon test. But it was not. It was a ritual. On the third day, a scout drone captured a closer image. Inside a large chamber, humans stood before a flag, hands pressed to their hearts. Some whispered words. Others stared straight ahead, faces full of something Kareth could not name. Pride? Sorrow? Determination? He replayed the footage many times, searching for meaning. "What are they doing?" asked Officer Tira, his voice quiet but tense. "They are remembering," Kareth said. He didn't know why he said it, but it felt true. Outside, the fleet of humans continued to gather. Their ships formed perfect lines like a wall of metal and light. Every hour more of them came. Yet none fired a single shot. The Varelians began to panic. They were not a warrior race. Their history was full of trade, science, and peace. They had never fought a full-scale war. They believed civilization had evolved beyond violence. To them, war was primitive, a thing of the past. But humans were different. The council called for a meeting. "We must prepare defenses," one elder said. "They might attack." Kareth shook his head. "We cannot fight what we do not understand." Yet, deep inside, he felt something cold. He had seen the look in human eyes during their ritual. They were not angry or cruel. They were ready. That night, Kareth could not sleep. From the observation deck, he looked again at the footage of humans gathering before battle. The rhythm of their movements, the songs they sang, the unity in their silence, it felt ancient and powerful. One soldier had tears in his eyes as he put on his helmet. Another clenched his fist and touched the shoulder of the man beside him. No words, just understanding. To the Varelians, it looked like madness. To Kareth, it looked like something else. Faith. He wondered. What kind of species remembers their dead before the war even begins? Moments later, the human ship started to move. Engines ignited like blue fire across the void. The formation was flawless, silent, terrifying in its precision. A message blinked again on the screen. "We are ready." The council panicked. Orders flew across channels. Defensive shields went up. Drones scrambled. But Kareth only watched. Then the humans began to broadcast something: music. It filled every channel, every signal wave, spreading through the Varelian network. It was not a warning. It was a song. Deep voices, drums, and words that none of the Varelians could translate. Yet, somehow, they understood the meaning. It was a farewell. Kareth felt his chest tighten. They were not marching to attack. They were marching to defend. Suddenly, distant scanners picked up movement, something else, coming from beyond the nearby nebula. A vast fleet, unknown, dark and spiked like claws tearing through space. Not humans. Not Varelians. Something older. Something worse. The humans had known. Kareth realized too late. The humans were not preparing for war against the Varelians. They were preparing to fight for them. Alarms screamed across the Varelian command deck. The unknown fleet approached fast, energy signatures burning bright and chaotic. The sky outside turned red from plasma trails. Kareth turned to his officers. "Open a channel to the humans," he ordered. A moment later, a human face appeared on the screencom, covered in armor, eyes sharp as iron. "Stay behind us," the human said. "This isn't your war." And then, the stars lit up. The first battle in centuries began, and Kareth stood frozen, watching humanity move with precision and fury unlike anything he had ever imagined. It was beautiful and terrifying at once. As explosions tore through the void, Kareth whispered to himself, "So this is what they were preparing for." In that instant, he understood the look in their eyes, the 1,000-yard stare of a species that had seen too much death and still chose to stand. Asterisk. The space around the Varelian homeworld exploded into light. The invading fleet moved like a living storm, their ships shaped like claws and bones, covered in burning symbols that no one could read. They came fast, firing energy bolts that cut through space like lightning, for the first time in hundreds of years. The Varelians felt fear, the kind that freezes the mind and steals the breath. Commander Kareth stood at the control deck, trying to make sense of the chaos. Alarms screamed, voices shouted, and the stars themselves seemed to bleed. Yet through it all, one thing stayed steady: the human fleet. The humans moved as one. Their ships spread out, forming a protective wall between the invaders and the Varelian colonies. Each vessel took its position without hesitation. They did not wait for orders. They already knew what to do. Kareth watched their communication channels, trying to understand their code. But what he heard was not orders, it was voices. Calm, focused voices talking like soldiers in an old dance. "Squad Bravo, hold formation. Echo Wing, flank left. Keep your eyes sharp, brothers. No one dies alone today." There was something about their tone, steady, fearless, almost comforting. It was the sound of people who had seen war many times and accepted its weight. The enemy fired first. Bright red plasma cut across space, striking the human front lines. Several ships took heavy damage immediately. But instead of retreating, the humans closed ranks. The next line of ships moved forward, covering the wounded ones. From the Varelian bridge, it looked like madness. From the humans, it looked like discipline. "Why don't they run?" Officer Tira whispered. "They're losing ships." Kareth couldn't answer. He didn't know. All he could do was watch as humans fought like no species he had ever seen. Their ships didn't fight just with weapons, they fought with rhythm. Every strike, every movement, every explosion felt like part of something ancient, almost ceremonial. It was the same energy he had seen in their pre-battle rituals, the calm before the storm, now transformed into fury within the storm itself. Human bombers broke formation and dove toward the enemy lines, their engines glowing white-hot. One of the Varelian officers gasped, "They're too close. They'll be destroyed." But that was the plan. The bombers fired torpedoes at point-blank range, taking out several enemy cruisers. The explosion lit up the void in blinding gold. Half the human bombers didn't return. Yet no one on their channels cried out. No one screamed. The only words that followed were quiet. "Good run, boys. You made it count." The Varelians were silent. They had never seen courage like this, courage that didn't need reward, courage that expected death and still went forward. The alien fleet adjusted, turning its focus toward the human capital ships. Massive cannons began to charge, building energy. Kareth saw the readings spike on his console and shouted, "They're targeting your lead vessel." The humans heard the warning. They didn't run. The flagship turned its hull toward the incoming blast, shielding the smaller vessels behind it. The shot hit. A wave of fire rolled across the flagship's armor, tearing through metal and flame. Kareth covered his eyes from the brightness. When the light faded, half the human ship was gone. Yet the other half still fired. A broken voice came through the comms, deep, calm, human. "We hold the line." That moment burned itself into Kareth's memory. He turned to his own crew. "Send every drone we have. Support their flank." Tyra hesitated. "Sir, that's against protocol. Do it." Kareth snapped. "They're fighting for us." Varelian drones launched into space, joining the fight for the first time. Though they were untrained for combat, the humans welcomed them instantly. "Good timing, Blue Wings," one pilot said over the channel. "Stick close. We'll keep you alive." The battle raged for hours. Human voices grew rough, their ships burned, but their formation never broke. The invaders began to falter, their confidence shaking. They had never seen such resistance. At one point, a Varelian broadcast caught a glimpse inside a human carrier. Soldiers stood in rows, ready to deploy in escape pods. Their helmets were marked with symbols, names, faces, maybe prayers. They didn't look afraid. They looked determined. One soldier turned toward the camera drone, smiled faintly, and saluted. Kareth didn't know why, but his chest tightened again. These beings, these humans, they weren't fighting just to win. They were fighting so others wouldn't have to. The alien fleet began to retreat, but the humans didn't chase them. They held position, scanning for survivors, tending to damaged ships. No celebration, no shouting, only silence and exhaustion. When it was finally over, the stars grew quiet again. The humans had saved them. Kareth watched the battered fleet drift slowly, their lights flickering like dying candles. And then he saw it again, the 1,000-yard stare in their eyes. The same expression he had seen before the battle. He finally understood. It wasn't pride or anger. It was memory. Humans remembered every battle, every friend lost, every reason they fought. That stare was not empty. It was full of everything they had seen and endured. Kareth lowered his head, his voice trembling. "They fight like they've already lived 1,000 wars." Tyra whispered beside him. "Maybe they have." The stars remained silent once more. But it was not the silence of peace, it was the silence after heroes had spoken. The battlefield was quiet now. Only drifting debris and fading light remained. The Varelian fleet floated among wrecks of alien ships and human vessels alike. Space, once calm, now carried scars of fire. Commander Kareth stood at the observation deck, watching human rescue crafts move among the ruins. They carried no banners of victory, only purpose. They searched for survivors, human and Varelian both. For a long time, Kareth said nothing. His crew waited, unsure what to do next. Then he finally spoke. "Open a channel to their flagship, if any of it still lives." The communications officer nodded and began searching frequencies. The static lasted almost a minute before a voice came through, low, hoarse, and human. "This is Commander Hale of the UHS Resolute. Identify yourself." Kareth stepped forward. "This is Commander Kareth of the Varelian Council. You fought for us." There was a pause. The voice grew softer. "We fought for everyone. The enemy you saw has destroyed 3 worlds already. You were next." Kareth hesitated. "You knew?" "Yes," Hale said. "We intercepted their signal weeks ago. We came as soon as we could." Kareth felt a strange mix of shame and gratitude. "We thought you were preparing to attack us." A short laugh came through the channel. "You're not the first ones to think that. Humans don't look peaceful when we prepare for war." The line went silent again. And Kareth imagined the man on the other side, tired, burned, surrounded by wreckage, yet still calm. Finally, Kareth asked, "Commander Hale, what was that we saw before the battle? The gathering, the songs, the silence. Was it a weapon test?" Hale chuckled quietly. "No, Commander. That's what we call the last stand ritual. It's something we do before every big fight. We remember the ones we've lost, and we promise not to waste the lives we still have. Kareth frowned. But you looked so calm. Not angry. Not afraid. That's the point, Holly said. Fear makes mistakes. Anger burns too fast. But memory keeps you steady. The words hung heavy in the air. Kareth turned to his crew, who were listening quietly. None of them had ever heard war spoken about like that. Why do you still fight? Kareth asked. Your species could stay safe on your homeworlds. You could avoid all this. Hale's answer came slow. Because someone has to stand between the monsters and the rest. That's what humanity does best. We fight so others can build. Kareth looked down at the flickering lights of the human fleet ships damaged. Engines weak, hulls scarred. They looked broken, yet somehow unyielding. He thought of how the Varelians would have reacted in the same situation, how they would have run, hidden, negotiated, or surrendered. And here were humans, bleeding for strangers they didn't even know. Commander Holly, Kareth said quietly, I watched your people die today. And yet, your fleet didn't break. Breaking isn't an option, Holly replied. We honor the fallen by finishing what they started. Every soldier knows that before they go. There was silence for a moment. Then Holly added softly, we call it grace, the ability to keep fighting, even when everything hurts. Not anger, not hate, just grace. Kareth repeated the word under his breath. Grace. Outside the window, he saw a group of human marines moving through wreckage, helping injured Varelians into rescue pods. One marine stopped to lift a Varelian child and hand her a small piece of cloth, the same symbol they wore before battle died. It was the human flag. Kareth watched as the child clutched it, eyes wide in awe. For the first time, he understood that humans didn't fight because they loved war. They fought because they couldn't stand to see others crushed by it. He opened the channel again. Commander Hale, your people have saved us. How can we repay you? Hale's voice came back, tired but warm. You don't owe us. Just remember this day. Remember that when darkness came, someone stood up. Static filled the line for a moment, then silence. Kareth looked out once more. The Resolute was heavily damaged, smoke drifting from its engines. Yet it stayed steady, holding position until every survivor was safe. Tira stepped closer. Sir, their ship cannot stay much longer. Should we offer repairs? Kareth nodded. Yes, offer everything we can. They've earned it. The crew moved quickly, sending supply ships and engineers. When Kareth finally boarded the human flagship, he was struck by the sight of their crew-tired faces, wounded arms, burned uniforms. Yet they still smiled. He met Commander Holly in person. The human stood tall, armor cracked, face marked by soot. His eyes carried that same look, the 1,000-yard stare. Kareth bowed slightly, a gesture of deep respect in his culture. You have changed how I see your kind. Holly smiled faintly. That's good. Maybe next time you won't be so afraid of us. Kareth looked around the human bridge screens flickering, soldiers repairing equipment with bare hands, medics tending to the injured. The smell of burnt metal filled the air, and yet there was no despair. Only calm. Only unity. As Kareth left the ship, he realized something he would never forget. The humans didn't just survive war, they transformed it. They made it a memory, a lesson, a promise. That night, as the stars glowed faintly once more, Kareth spoke softly to himself. They do not fight because they must. They fight because they choose to. The battle had ended days ago, but the stars still seemed dim. The wreckage of ships floated silently, like ghosts refusing to leave. Even the Varelian capital, usually glowing with silver lights, felt darker, quieter. Commander Kareth walked through the human camp set up near orbit. Repair drones hummed, engineers welded, and soft voices spoke over broken radios. Yet something felt different today. The humans were not fixing weapons or planning another fight. They were preparing for something else. At the center of the base stood a wide, flat platform. Dozens of humans gathered around it, carrying small metal tags in their hands. They were building something tall, a frame of black steel covered in flags and names. Kareth turned to a nearby Marine, a young woman with a bandaged arm. "What are they doing?" She smiled faintly. "It's our memorial, sir. For the ones who didn't make it back." Kareth looked at the growing structure. "You build it here? So far from home?" She nodded. "Where they fell is where they stay remembered." The words hit him softly. The Varelians honored the dead by forgetting them, by erasing tragedy from their archives. Humans did the opposite. They built memories from pain. Kareth stayed to watch. One by one, the soldiers approached the frame. They placed the metal tags, each with a name, onto the wall. Some saluted. Some whispered. Others just stood in silence. Then the singing began. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cheerful. It was a low, steady hum that rolled through the air like a heartbeat. The melody carried no language Kareth knew, yet it felt familiar. It was full of sadness. And peace. Commander Halle stood near the front, his uniform still torn, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. When he spoke, his voice was calm. "We fought beside brothers and sisters who will never see the sunrise again. But they gave their last breath so that others could. We carry their memory not as chains, but as light." The soldiers bowed their heads. The air grew heavy, yet beautiful. Kareth felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen humans fight with fire and precision, but this quiet grace was harder to understand. There was no pride here, only love. A child's voice caught his attention. It was the same Varelian girl the soldiers had saved earlier. She stood near Halle, holding that small human flag against her chest. Halle knelt beside her, smiling gently. "Do you know what this means?" he asked her. She shook her head. "It means we never forget," he said. "Not the fear, not the loss, but also not the courage." Kareth's translator recorded every word. He wanted his people to hear them one day. When the ceremony ended, no one clapped. No one cheered. They simply stood together for a moment longer before returning to work. It was as if mourning and strength were the same thing to them. Later that evening, Kareth sat with Commander Halle near the observation deck. The stars reflected off the glass like silent witnesses. "You mourn with songs," Kareth said quietly. "We mourn with silence. Perhaps that's why we never learned to fight." Halle chuckled. "Maybe, but we sing because silence hurts too much." Kareth tilted his head. "And what happens when you lose too many? When there are no songs left?" Halle looked at the stars. "Then we listen to the silence. Because even that means someone once stood here." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of machines filled the background. Finally, Kareth asked, "Will you go home now?" Halle shook his head. "Home is wherever we're needed next. The enemy is still out there. Someone has to keep watch." Kareth frowned. "You could stay here, rest. My people owe you that." Halle smiled tiredly. "Rest comes after peace, Commander. Not before." The simplicity of that line struck Kareth deeper than any weapon. He looked again at the memorial below, lights flickering gently around the names. Humans moved among them like shadows, repairing, cleaning, tending to the dead with care. Each act felt like part of a promise they had made long ago. Kareth whispered to himself, "You turn pain into strength." "How do you do that?" Halle heard him. "By remembering what the pain cost us," he said, "and making sure it was worth it." That night, Kareth returned to his ship with a heavy but changed heart. He gathered his officers and told them what he had witnessed. "They fight like legends," he said, "but they grieve like poets." The crew listened in silence. Some of them had once called humans dangerous, savage, primitive. None of them said those words again. Through the viewport, Kareth saw the humans preparing to leave. Their engines burned softly, golden and blue, fading into the dark. The memorial stayed behind, anchored on a small asteroid now glowing with light. The Varelians would later call that place the Rock of Grace. And every year, human ships would return not for battle, but for remembrance. Kareth knew then that humanity's strength wasn't only in their weapons. It was in their hearts, in the way they remembered, in the way they refused to let death be the final word. Weeks passed after the battle, and the galaxy seemed calm again. Trade ships returned, the lights of the Varelian colonies brightened, and people began to speak of peace. But Commander Kareth knew peace was never as permanent as people wanted to believe. Every night, he looked at the stars and thought of the humans, their songs, their memorials, their calm eyes in the face of chaos. He wondered where they were now, what new storm they faced. Then one morning, the quiet ended. The alarm lights flashed crimson through the command deck. "Unidentified fleet approaching from Sector 9, the officer shouted. Energy signatures similar to the previous invaders. Kareth's heart dropped. "How many?" "Too many to count, sir." He didn't hesitate. "Alert the council. Begin evacuation protocols." The room filled with voices in panic, but Kareth raised his hand. "No, we will not run this time." The crew stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, our fleet is small, our defense is weak." "I know," Kareth said, his voice steady. "But we learned something from the humans. Running only delays the storm. Standing gives others time to live." The words felt heavy in the air. The officers exchanged looks. Some were afraid, others uncertain, but none argued. Kareth took a deep breath. "Open a channel to Commander Halle." It took hours to get a response. Static filled the bridge until finally, a voice came through, rough and familiar. "This is Halle." "Halle," Kareth said. "They're back." The same enemy. Sector 9. There was silence on the other end, then Hale's calm voice. "We knew they'd try again." "How long before they reach you?" "Less than a day, then we're coming." Kareth frowned. "You're too far. You'll never arrive in time." Hale's voice held quiet confidence. "You stood with us when we buried our dead. Now we stand with you when the next storm comes." The channel went dead. Kareth turned to his officers. "Prepare every ship we have. We fight until help arrives." It felt strange giving that order. Varelians were builders, not soldiers. Their ships were meant for exploration, not combat. But something had changed in them since meeting the humans. They no longer wanted others to fight their battles for them. The fleet moved into position near the outer edge of their system. The enemy ships appeared soon after dark, jagged, crawling with energy. As the first wave approached, Kareth's hands tightened on the command rail. "All batteries fire!" The Varelian ships released their energy blasts. The sky filled with light. For the first time in history, Varelians fought with purpose, not just to survive, but to protect. The battle was fierce. Their weapons were weaker, their armor thinner, but their will was stronger. Every ship that fell inspired another to fight harder. Kareth's voice echoed through the comms. "Hold the line. Remember what they taught us." It was chaos. Explosions rippled across the void. The enemy's red beams sliced through Varelian shields, tearing ships apart. Yet no one fled. Kareth's communications officer cried out, "They're breaking through the left flank." "Send the reserve wings," Kareth ordered. "No ship stands alone." The enemy ships began closing in, surrounding them like a net. Kareth could almost hear the silence before defeat, until a flash of blue light cut across the darkness. The scanners lit up with new signals. Dozens of them, hundreds, "Sir." Tira shouted, eyes wide. "It's the humans." Through the viewport, The blackness of space erupted with engines and light. Human warships poured out of hyperspace like a wave of steel and fire. Their formation was tight, their weapons glowing. The sound of their arrival almost felt like thunder. Commander Hale's voice came through every channel. "Varelian fleet, fall back to our right wing. We'll take the front." Cheers erupted across the bridge. The humans wasted no time. They dove straight into the heart of the enemy formation, weapons firing with precision. Every move looked practiced, every shot deliberate. The Varelians followed behind, no longer just observers, they were allies. Kareth's ship moved alongside the Resolute, both fleets fighting side by side. "Commander Kareth," Hale's voice said over the comm. "You kept them busy long enough for us to arrive. You gave us a chance." Kareth smiled faintly. "We learned from the best." The combined forces fought as one. Human destroyers shielded Varelian cruisers. Varelian drones repaired human hulls mid-battle. Every explosion pushed the enemy farther back, but the invaders did not retreat easily. Their flagship was massive, a dark burning fortress. It unleashed a blast that tore through 3 human ships. Kareth felt the shockwave rattle his bones. "That thing will destroy us all if it fires again." Hale's voice came through, steady as ever. "Then we take it down together." The plan was madness, but it was the kind of madness humans had taught them to believe in. The 2 fleets charged. Human and Varelian ships dove toward the enemy flagship, dodging beams of red fire. Kareth's hands trembled, but his voice stayed calm. "For every world they've burned fire." Missiles and plasma bolts streaked across the void, slamming into the enemy's hull. The massive ship cracked and shuddered, its lights flickering at last. It exploded in a burst of fire so bright it outshone the nearby stars. For a few seconds, there was only silence, then the cheers came. The battle was won. But Kareth knew it was more than victory. It was transformation. They had not just survived. They had stood as the fires faded. Hale's voice returned one last time, quiet but proud. "Looks like you've learned the ritual." Kareth smiled, eyes wet. "We learned from your grace." And as the human and Varelian fleets floated together under the calm light of the stars, Kareth realized something eternal. Courage wasn't born in a single species. It was shared, carried, and remembered. The war was over at last. The battlefield that had once burned with light and sound now drifted quietly under the stars. Fragments of ships, human and Varelian alike, floated together in silence, a shared graveyard and a shared victory. Commander Kareth stood at the bridge window, staring into that calm darkness. For the first time in his life, he did not feel small before the stars. He felt part of them. The humans had not left. Their fleet remained in orbit, helping rebuild the Varelian defenses and repairing what the battle had destroyed. Machines worked day and night, and crews from both species moved side by side. The air smelled of metal and hope. Kareth's ship connected with the human flagship Resolute. When he stepped inside, the halls no longer felt foreign. The soldiers greeted him with nods and faint smiles. They were tired, so very tired, but they carried themselves with quiet pride. "Commander." Hale met him near the observation deck. His armor was scratched, his face lined, yet his eyes were calm as ever. "You made it," Hale said. Kareth smiled. "So did you." Hale laughed softly. "Barely." They stood together, watching teams from both species fixing what had been broken. Varelians shared advanced tools. Humans offered their endless hands and energy. It was strange how easily they worked as one. After a moment, Kareth asked, "What happens now, Commander? Will you return to Earth?" Hale shook his head. "Not yet. We stay until you can stand on your own. Then we move on to wherever we're needed next. That's how we survive. We keep moving forward." Kareth nodded slowly. "You never rest." Hale's smile faded. Rest is earned, not given. Maybe one day humanity will find it. A moment of silence passed between them. Then Kareth said softly, "My people will never forget what you did. You showed us how to be more than we were." Holly turned to look at him. "You did that yourselves. You stood when running was easier. That's the hardest thing any species can do." Outside the window, repair drones drifted between ships, sparks glowing like tiny stars. For the first time, Varelians were learning the art of defense, not just survival. They trained beside human instructors, practicing maneuvers, learning tactics. And in every exercise, they began with the same ritual they had once thought: strange silence, reflection. Memory. The humans had called it grace. Now it belonged to both of them. Later that evening, a ceremony was held aboard the Varelian flagship. The two fleets gathered together through holographic connection. There were no speeches of victory, no songs of triumph. Only names of those who had fallen, read one by one. Kareth spoke first. "They came from across the stars, carrying courage where we had none. They fought not for conquest, but for protection. And in their fire we found our strength." Then Hale's voice came through, steady and deep. "Every world we save teaches us something new. From you, we learned that peace is worth protecting, even for those who forgot how to fight. So we share this day, not as saviors but as brothers." A soft hum rose through the fleet. The humans began to sing again, the same low, steady rhythm Kareth remembered from the memorial. But this time, Varelian voices joined them. Their tones blended, alien and human, different yet beautiful together. When the song ended, the silence that followed was pure. Kareth turned to Holly. "Commander, I once thought your species was dangerous. Now I know I was right. But not because of your weapons, because of your hearts." Holly smiled faintly. "That's the kind of danger the galaxy needs." He extended his hand. Kareth hesitated for a moment, then clasped it. The gesture felt simple, yet it carried the weight of everything they had lived through: the battles, the losses, the understanding. Years later, the alliance between humans and Varelians would become a legend. The younger races would speak of it with awe, how two species met in fear and parted as allies. They would call it the Pact of Grace. And in time, the Varelians built a monument of their own, not of metal, but of light. It floated above their homeworld, glowing softly in the darkness, shaped like two hands reaching toward one another. On it were engraved words that had once come from a tired human commander: "Fear fades. Memory remains. Grace endures." Commander Kareth grew older, but he never forgot that first battle. He never forgot the 1,000-yard stare in the human eyes, the look of those who had seen war and chosen compassion anyway. Every time he stood beneath the stars, he whispered the same promise: "We will stand as you stood. And we will remember." Far away, beyond the edge of known space, the human fleet traveled once more into the dark, quiet, steady, unyielding. Another world needed help. Another story was beginning, and somewhere in the endless night, humanity's song of grace echoed again, soft, sorrowful, and eternal.